Cinema is a popular media of mass consumption which plays a prominent role in molding opinions, constructing images, and reinforcing dominant cultural values. Male perceptions about women in our society and the social notions about them have been greatly influenced by Indian cinema. In Indian mythological films, masculine points of view have been portrayed and emphasized. These films depict women characters as the epitome of virtues and value. Many a times, the roles women play on screens are often the director's perception of what they are supposed to play. This was usually based on the belief systems, moral values, and the views of the male director, and also highly based on the viewers themselves. As stated by Milton Rockich in 1968, each member of the audience looks for entertainment that conforms to an existing system of beliefs, attitudes, and values which come from a socio cultural context in society. This is what the Indian cinema has been built on. However, what about women's perspective of it? When will the camera's focus shift from the woman's body to her identity as an individual? The female gaze, while often considered to be an exact opposite of the male gaze, is the process of using the presence of a female perspective to emphasize the story's emotions and characters. Just as the male gaze is what men see, similarly, the female gaze is about making the audience feel what the women experience. In this video, we will attempt to study a few mainstream mythological films from the birth of cinema to the present day to look for a pattern or whether there has been a slight change in the portrayal of women.
Raja Harishchandra marked the beginning of Indian cinema in 1913. It was India's first feature film by Dadasaheb Phalke and was adapted from a mythological story. At the time of shooting, there was a stigma associated with women acting. It was considered indecent, and actresses were often associated with prostitutes. This resulted in the entire film having an all men cast, which had men playing the roles of the lead female characters too. Even when Phalke approached multiple women for the role, they refused due to this belief being indoctrinated in them. While the story portrayed the women as mainly being passive wives, it's hard to conclude as to whether these roles evolved, since parts of the film were lost in a fire. Then came the first Kannada talkie film Sati Salochana in 1934. The story of the ongoing war between Ram and Ravana was told through the point of view of Sulochana, who was the daughter-in-law of Ravana. Although it is now a lost film, it holds significance because it told the story through a woman's perspective. As the years went on, the stigma associated with women acting slowly began to fade away. Actresses were now usually hired during their teens and were deemed unfit for any lead roles by the age of 30 as they supposedly lost their youthfulness, while the men were acting into their 50s, playing the lead role beside teenagers. This is probably the beginning of the idea of catering to the audience and, in particular, the male gaze. Maya Bazar follows the story of an incident between the Kauravas and the Yadavas. Balrama's daughter Sasireka is promised to Arjuna's son Abhimanyu. After the Pandavas gamble away their kingdom and wealth, Sasireka's parents no longer approve of the match and instead decide to get her married to Duryodhana's son Lakshmana Kumar. However, Sasireka or Sasi has her heart set on Abhimanyu and refuses to accept the change. Sasi is shown as a woman with a mind of her own, who doesn't bend to the will of anyone, including her overbearing mother. She disobeys her mother and escapes to go on a midnight boat ride with her lover. Her decisiveness encourages Krishna to plan a way for the two to get married without anyone finding out and enables the aid of Gatochka. At the end of the film, Sasi ends up marrying the man that she chooses and not the one chosen for her. The overarching depiction of women in this film is respectful. The female characters play an extremely significant role throughout the story and also make key decisions. Their personalities are strong and individualistic and not just present in the film as an object of pleasure or desire. The role of mothers is also highlighted, with the male characters giving much importance to their advice. Maya Bazar is a classic showing women as they are, with their beauty, their strength, as well as their imperfections.
As the 1960s came around, multiple women's issues began gaining importance in our patriarchal Indian society. Many films were being made that touched on the themes of rape, widowhood, adultery, etc. But these films never gained popularity in the public eye, and such films weren't taking an actual interest in these issues but were using women and these issues as a plot point. Rather than focusing on the women's perspective of the issue, filmmakers would show the heroic man fixing the women's problems. A 1966 Telugu film, Shakuntala is a movie based on the mythological story of Shakuntala, who was given shelter by Kanga Maharshi when she was found abandoned in the forest. King Dushyanta, on his hunting trip, notices Shakuntala from afar and, unbeknownst to her, watches her as she dances with her friends in the forest. She is shown looking directly into the camera sensually, enticing the viewers. When they finally meet, they seem to have an unspoken attraction between each other, with their eyes locked. He marries her as per the Gandharva marriage and gives her his royal ring before returning to his rulership. In all their interactions, the dynamic of Dushyanta looking from afar without the knowledge of Shakuntala is maintained, and he does not affirm his presence until he absolutely needs to. Shakuntala throughout the film is seen as a desirable object that the viewer and Dushyanta yearn to possess, strengthening the idea of the male gaze. Sati Sumati traces the story of a devoted wife who stands by her husband Kaushika despite his many misgivings and neglect of her. She deals with his indifference to her and his lust towards other women, stating that he can do whatever makes him happy. When Kaushika develops leprosy and is cheated of his property and wealth by a prostitute, Mohanangi, he is forgiven by his understanding wife. This comes just a bit after a scene where Sumati goes to serve her husband even as he fondles Mohanangi. He continues to do so even in the presence of his wife, while she reinforces her devotion to him by offering to wash his feet every day. This humiliation and mistreatment she faces is forgotten. Kaushika, along with Sumati, head off on a pilgrimage, on the course of which she faces many more injustices. Finally, Sumati brings the universe to a halt to prevent her husband from dying and only gives in after the gods plead with her. While it is astonishing that a female character of that time held so much power, we need to remind ourselves that all this power resides in her devotion to a man, bringing us back to the male gaze. The entire narrative is woven around the concept of pativrata, or service to the husband. A husband should be equivalent to God in the eyes of his wife, and she must follow him in his shadow no matter what the circumstances. While this sort of thinking is appalling and seems like an injustice now, this was, however, the manner in which both women and men used to think and agree upon. The film is a mere reflection of societal roles at the time, so can we really criticize it or just comment?
Sita Kalyanam starts off on a promising note with Sita taking center stage. She is born as a reincarnation of goddess Lakshmi to take revenge on Ravan, who insulted the goddess, and is proclaimed to be the person who will bring about the destruction of Lanka. Present day Sita, a grown young woman, is playful and beautiful. As she frolics around with her handmaidens, she happens upon the famed bow Pinaka and lifts it with ease, reinforcing her importance as the destroyer of Lanka. Her father, King Janaka, and his courtiers marvel at her strength and decide that they will conduct a Kalyanam to find her suitor, where the task would be to break the bow. After this, the entire movie seems to have changed in the lead character. On the day of Sita's Kalyanam, the entire narrative gets sidetracked by heroic tales of legendary men like Ram, Bhagirath, Guru Vishwamitra, and a few incarnations of Vishnu. While these stories of men are important, the entire concept of Sita being an avenger of sorts is completely lost. Her strength is of no value at all, and we never get to see Sita fulfilling her destiny. Instead, we see a meek Sita, unaware of her power and significance, being awed by brave men defeating evil while her path of courage is never trod. The movie ends with her marriage to Ram, leaving us, the audience, confused, since we started watching a movie about Sita only to find that the principal role is again taken by the man. Moving on to Peter Brook's retelling of Mahabharata in 1989. We observed instances of forceful marriages where the woman is not given a choice as to whom she gets to marry. A prime example is that of Amba, who does not wish to marry Bhishma but is pressured into it. After begging him to let her go, she is turned away by her lover Salva because he views her as a tainted woman. We bear witness to his indifference towards a woman who has sacrificed her life and family to be with him. In the case of Draupadi, although she never intended to marry all of the Pandava brothers, she didn't have a say in the matter. Yudhishthira's lapse in judgment causes him to gamble Draupadi away during a Ludo match against the Kauravas, resulting in her being forced to undress in front of the entire clan. To add to her humiliation, Dushasana forcefully grabs her hair and drags her out of her room despite her being on her period. The Kauravas justify this action by stating that since she satisfies 5 men, she is clearly public property. Objectification in the film reaches a peak when King Bharata tries to possess Draupadi in exchange for a rose and forces himself upon her. He even threatens grave consequences when she tries to refuse him.
As the 2000s rolled around, the popularity of mythological films had decreased with the steady growth of new genres of films such as action, stunt, and comedy. This was also the time in which item songs gained incredible traction and were a staple in almost every mainstream film. While there weren't many direct adaptations of mythological stories, directors and writers alike used this opportunity to create more relevant retellings of Hindu mythology. One such case is Ravanan, released in the year 2010. The movie Ravanan is a modern depiction of Sitaharan. It is a story about Bira, a present day Ravan who kidnaps Ragini or Sita, a police superintendent's wife. He does this as a ploy to take revenge against the torment the officers inflicted on his sister, which resulted in her taking her own life. Similarly, Bira threatens to sexually abuse Ragini at various points of the film. In this movie, women are treated in a disrespectful and demeaning manner. The male characters are indifferent to the women and only use them to satisfy their own intentions. The entire concept of females being emotionally weak and delicate is highlighted in various scenes. Avantika is a fierce and strong warrior who never paid heed to insignificant things like how she looked. When Sivudu paints on her hand while she isn't aware, she gets furious, confronts him, and questions his identity. Avantika immediately attacks Sivudu, who during the fight wreaks a transformation upon her. He uses cherries and his blood to adorn her and unties her warrior clothes to reveal her femininity. The scene depicts how all women need to fit into one ideal of beauty and sexuality, an ideal created by men. When Avantika meets the head of the warriors with the tattoo on her hand, he rebukes her for turning towards beauty, claiming that it demeans her strong personality. He considers her unworthy of the honor, insinuating that how she looks makes her less than she was before. She is condemned for both her ferocity as well as her womanhood. Avantika starts as a bold and powerful heroine, but eventually transforms into the object of desire and fits the mold of the item girl that the male audience in India so vehemently craves.
Mythological stories have always worshipped goddesses, and there is an ideal conveyed in the portrayal of them. It was a way of bringing about empowerment and independence to women in a male dominated society. However, this depiction never made it to mainstream cinema. In popular mythological films, women characters, even if they are the leading role, have a certain mold that they must fit into. As we can observe over time, the depiction of women in such films has only gotten worse. The perfect woman has evolved from an individualistic mother or daughter to a wife whose life revolves around her husband, and finally, an item. When society is progressing in so many different ways, why is it that we find a regression in this particular scenario? This could perhaps be because in a patriarchal Indian society, while men find it easy to worship powerful goddesses, they have a hard time accepting the same traits in a real woman. They feel threatened and gravitate towards putting down women more. At the end of the day, women in cinema have a long way to go. The female gaze is only just gaining momentum in the Indian film industry. This leaves us with one question. Will we continue to ride this small but significant wave of change, or will it crash into the shore before it even reaches its peak?